Yeah, but the basically, you look into Kol Torah, for example, which I know is controversial. That's Kol Torah, famous sefer. It's a sefer by Hillel Mishkalov that was supposedly, purportedly given over to him by the Gra. These are Talmudim of the Gra. One of the biggest mysteries at this point in history has to be the biggest mystery. For me, it's a big mystery. For you probably won't sleep over tonight, But the Gra had many Talmudim. Of the Talmudim, one of the most famous was Rechaim Volozhin. Nefesh Chaim, everyone knows about him, and the other ones, obviously had many Talmudim that were the Svarim and went off, became leaders of different communities. He was mashpia on a lot of people, obviously. But there's a line of teachings that ended up in a sefer called Kol Torah, from the pasuk in Shir Shirim referring to the Gula. And in this sefer, basically, it's all about if it's Mashiach. It's all about the footsteps of Mashiach, and what's new about this, what's novel about the sefer, very novel about the sefer, which is probably one of the reasons why it's so controversial. Not probably, it is the reason why it's so controversial. Is because of the fact that it addresses the issue of Mashiach ben Yosef and the things that we as a nation can do to hasten the arrival of Mashiach, right? That we can do to soften the transition to Yemos Mashiach. That's really what it's all about. And some very, very interesting and even bizarre things to some people who are not familiar with a lot of these issues. But the whole story of the Gra itself is very interesting because unless you are somebody who learns Kabbalah, you probably would not be familiar with all the Sifrei HaGra. He was one of the biggest Mekubalim in the last 300-400 years. He was a leader in Kabbalah, and he argues with the Ramchal in different places, and even with the Arizal to some degree. And the stories are unbelievable of the Gra. Most in the Ashkenazic world specifically, in the Sephardic world, they don't even really pay attention to the Gra very much at all, and certainly not so much in the Chassidic world because they didn't get along so well, back in the time of the Gra.
He didn't like them.
But better, right? But not like it was back then. Back then it was fierce, and it was also a different world to a large degree. But the Ashkenazic world, he's like our Rabbi the last couple hundred years, and when he says something, we pay a lot of attention to it, except when it goes in the realm of Nistar. Right? The world of Nistar.
Oh,
the realm of Nigla, you find the Sefer, the Gra put it all over the place, in Mishnah Berurah, it's Psachalach, Piskalach, and his Musar, and the Vortlach he gave over, there'll always be printed, things like that. But the Divrei Kabbalah that he wrote, partly because it's very complicated, most people don't learn it, but it's not even on the shelves of most Bati Midrashos that follow Shittas HaGra. Kilu doesn't exist whatsoever. Nefesh Chaim is teaching what he learned from the Gra to a large degree, but he refers to him, and at the back of the Nefesh Chaim book, the brown volume, as opposed to the little skinny one, the shorter one, the back he actually has all kinds of different Vorlach B'Shem Gra that are quite Kabbalistic. But again, it's like, what was he doing? The Nefesh Chaim is written specifically to counteract Chassidus to a large degree. Not sort of counteract, but it was emphasizing what was the whole machlokas back at that point in time. We won't go there right now. But a large part of that machlokas was the fact that, as he says, you could go places into a Chassidish-based medrash, not even find a full set of shots. You'll find Sfarim, Rabbi this, the Chassidus, and look in Kabbalah, but Gemara, things like that. Obviously today it's much different. Today, everything's there. Every base medrash has it all. And Baruch Hashem, everything is much more mainstream. The Ashkenazic world picked up some of the Chassidish things, and the Chassidish world picked up, everyone sort of like moved, more towards the center. Mm-hmm. But regardless of all that, the Nefesh Chaim was written back at that time because there was a major war going on, and you want to say pick it up unless you know what was going on, because the Nefesh Chaim stands alone as a sefer. It's a phenomenal work. It's a fantastic thing to learn. But there was like behind the scenes, like kind of like fighting going on. As this is what we say, is what the Torah says, and is what you're saying, and so on and so forth. But that's the extent of it. You don't find much more of the teaching of the Gra in a Kabbalistic way that's out in the open than the Nefesh Chaim. But the actual Sefer Gra themselves, for example, on Sefer Desnusa or other Sforim, he addressed everything, and it was very detailed. It was absolutely phenomenal what he was able to grasp and understand. And of course, the Maisim about him were tremendous. But even that is like compartmentalized, is like put aside. Then all of a sudden, I don't know, about 50, 60, 70 years ago, some time ago, that a manuscript showed up, and one version was actually published by Rabbi Chaim Friedlander, and with a little introduction to it. And it's controversial for a few reasons. One is because of the material itself. The material itself is talking about Mashiach ben Yosef. Almost nobody talks about Mashiach ben Yosef. There's like one reference in the Gemara in Sukkah to Mashiach ben Yosef, and here and there you'll find a reference. But beyond that, how many shiurim have you ever gone to about Mashiach ben Yosef? Almost nothing. What do you know about Mashiach ben Yosef? Almost nothing, right? You know about Yosef, and like here once in a while you'll hear something. If you go investigate, you'll find something, but you won't find a handbook, a guide that will take you through all kinds of different dargas of what Mashiach ben Yosef is all about. Even though he's the transition really from pre-Mashiach to most of Mashiach. He's like the bridge. He's the back that we walk across to get to that next level. Mashiach ben David requires him to do his work first before he gets to be able to do his thing, which is one of the reasons why, on a more esoteric level, the Sitra Achra will contest this specific work and get involved and interfere, because he knows if we take this work seriously, he's finished. That's what it comes down to. If we were to follow this Kol Torah and do what the Gra says, the Galus would be over a long time ago. Clearly, anybody who knows what's going on inside that Sefer, just read what's inside there, you'll see what he's saying. It's absolutely phenomenal, remarkable. So this very day, there are many people, including descendants of the Gra, many generations down, but usually very straight, who hold the Sefer is not authentic, and the Gra could never say things like that, wouldn't say things like that. But the Zilberman Yeshiva, which is quite a renowned place in terms of their chinuch program, which follows Shittus Gra. They set their whole program up. They learn like almost, I think, 365 days a year, these kids. These kids know off Tanakh, up by heart, everything. Phenomenal program. And they follow Shittus Gra right down to the dots on top of the bumps. And what happens basically is that they research the Sefer, and there was an article in Mishpacha, I think in 5765, something like that about the Zilberman Yeshiva, in which they talk about Kol Torah and said that we researched it, and as far as we're concerned, everything is authentic. It's from the Gra. One of the reasons why it's also questionable is because it was never published back in the Gra's time. Most times an author writes a Sefer, either it's published in the author's lifetime or shortly thereafter, and everyone knows that's what the author wrote. But this was a manuscript. This was not meant to be a Sefer, because it was notes given by the Gra back in the 1700s to inspire his Talmud, and he himself, the Gra himself, was on the way to move to Eretz Yisrael as well. He was on the way to begin what was called Itchalta de Gula, right? The beginning of the Gula back at that time. The Baal Shem Tov also was markish this. He was also doing his own Talmudim too. It was 5,500. Based on the Zohar, that was the time that the upper well springs were supposed to open up and facilitate the Gula. The first time since we left Bavel, back at the time of Mordechai. The first time. That's what was supposed to happen again. 5,500, that's when the Gemara starts to spark, and so the Gra was all for it, and he was on his way. He was clearly on his way. As to why he didn't get there, it's also addressed in Kol Torah. But his Talmidim, of course, were the ones that did get there. And they began these communities like Mei Shearim and all that, which were in the middle of nowhere at that point in time, and certainly there was no fast food places to speak of. Right, and they had to defend literally the walls because they were in danger all the time, and they fought disease and lack of food and all that. But slowly but surely, things began to gather, and then of course more people came from Russia, different places around. Eventually, you had these waves of Aliyah. You can look at Beryl Wine's book; it goes into these things in pretty much detail. But that was the beginning of it, back at that point in time. And the manuscript was to instruct his Talmidim what to do and how to do it in preparation for Mashiach coming. That's what the Sefer was all about. So that's very avant-garde in the Frum community, right? Because we don't like, ever since Shabbatai Tzvi, not the Svardish community so much, because they weren't affected by Shabbatai Tzvi, and the Chassidish community was affected by it. So but then they were like a little softer because Chassidus is based upon Kabbalah, so they're not going to ban Kabbalah because we banned the whole thing. It was more watered down Kabbalah for the masses. But the Ashkenazic world, the Litvish world, was of course the most affected to a large degree, and they just tabooed anything to do with Mashiach for the most part, and barely people say that Yikari on a daily basis because of the references to Mashiach. That's not entirely true. But the reality is that it creates a lot of friction and backlash. As a result of that, we live in the dark. we are now 1,900 and what 25 years like that since the base of Pinchas was destroyed. 70 CE. Now it's 1,000. It's 2011. So it's 2000. So it's 1930 plus 1941. 1,941 years since the base of Pinchas was destroyed. We are still in Galus. Tisha B'Av comes out on the same day as Pesach every year. If it's a Monday, it's a Monday. If it's a Tuesday, it's a Tuesday, right? The significance is obvious, right? Isn't it? I mean, what would you say? Why is it just a stama thing that happens in the course of the year, or is there some kind of hashkacha pratis that? There's all kinds of vortlach, but it's pretty obvious. It's the exact same message as the matzah gives us every Pesach, right? We all sit down and say, like, matzah, can't wait to eat the matzah. For 30 days we don't eat matzah because we don't have a tam for it, basically, and you can't wait to eat the matzah. But the reality is the matzah is a slap across the face. That's what the matzah is meant to be. That's why it comes into this fantastic table. You don't sit there living. The whole table is not, keel, you're about to leave, right? If you're about to leave for the airport, you don't set a fancy table to eat a meal, right? We're eating a meal b'kvias, big time kvias. We're even like, a seva, with the wine, the whole thing. Like the whole meal is kvias. And the matzah is like poor man's bread, which the Maharal explains because poor men are free people. And a poor man has no money to invest. When the stock market crashes, one of the few solaces I have for the fact that I have no money is I lose no money either. I can't invest any money, so I lose no money now. So poor people are able to move at a moment's notice. They don't have investments. As I mentioned before, with the lashon of Haggadah of Yaakov Avinu, that not to invest in the place, because you invest in the place, you're stuck in that place because you can't always sell your investments in time unless you're really planning the whole thing out. There are obviously people who plan to make aliyah. They did a keseder, they invested, they sold, and they got out. They took their money with them. Other people today are stuck. They might want to come, but they're stuck in America because their houses can't sell, and their investments are down, basically. It's problematic. That's what Yaakov understood. Investing in a place is very problematic. So the matzah reminds us that, you have to, you can live in this world and invest in this world, but never become so attached to this world that if you have to leave, you're stuck, you're stuck behind like Lot back in stone. That's the message of the Haggadah. But a bigger message of the matzah, if we won't go through the whole shir because we've done it so many times before, but you haven't because you haven't been in it for the last few years. But the basic idea is that we eat matzah because the Geula was not completed. We left Mitzrayim quickly, not because we had to, right? We were not holding a Memta Sharitum anymore. That was all the way back by Makkah's Dam. By Makkah's Bechayris, we left Begad Rama. Kosh Baruch Hu was Mafi himself, the Klal Yisrael, the Nisim and the Flois. Mitzrayim was broken. It was clear. We were completely out of it. We could have stayed in Mitzrayim as long as we wanted to in terms of ruchnis. That's clear. That's a misunderstanding that most people have. The idea that we're about to fall to Nun Shari Tumah, that's by Makkah's Dam. That's before Kosh Baruch Hu began the Makkah. But every Makkah was a Gilu Shechina. So by the time Kosh Baruch Hu himself does the Makkah B'choris, you cannot be a Memta Shari Tumah and Kosh Baruch Hu do Makkah's B'choris. You can't. It's an oxymoron. You can't have both realities overlapping. So therefore, for Bnei Yisrael to be able to witness the Kosh Baruch Hu doing this Makkah, we had to be completely, which is why Paro was looking for Moshe in his pajamas, Paro's pajamas, right? Not Moshe's pajamas, right? To be able to tell us to leave because he's broken. He's the Tumah's down at that point in time. So then why did we have to leave so quickly? Because Chazal explained that if we had stayed one moment longer, the Yetzer Hara would have been destroyed. It was on the verge of being destroyed that night. Because Kedusha was increasing. As Kedusha increases, it basically pushes evil out of the world. And if it kept going, there's no room for evil, and that would have been Yemot Mashiach right then. We had to leave Mitzrayim to avoid starting in Moshe Mashiach there. So the question is, why was that the case? Because we weren't Zeicha. Because Baruch Hu did the whole thing on his own. We didn't choose the Geula. We didn't build towards the Geula. We didn't do any of this stuff that we're supposed to do, right? Because Baruch Hu, because he made a promise to Avraham Avinu that, look, I'm going to save somebody to turn the lights on Eretz Canaan. Otherwise, there's no point to all that you're doing over here. So we weren't Zeicha to it, and 4/5 got lost in Makkah's Choshech anyhow. But the 1/5, at least, something had to remain behind to fulfill the prophecy and the promise that Kosh Baruch Hu made to Avraham Avinu back at the beginning. So therefore, Kosh Baruch Hu brought the Geula, but couldn't complete the Geula because we weren't Zeicha the Geula at that point in time. We had to go out and work our way up on our own, and by Har Sinai, and not doing the Zahav, and not the Meraglim, and eventually bring the Geula on our own, because we have to be Shutfim. with a Kosh Baruch in the process. We're not here for a free ride. That's not how you go to the world to come. So, therefore, the matzah symbolizes, for the umpteenth time, because people have been watching these videos now for the last 2 years are going, I can't believe he's talking about that all over again. We've heard that video 4 or 5 times already. But, for the point, right, to make the point, that the matzah is there to remind us that we could not bring the geula because we weren't zoicha. So every year we sit down to make the seder, the matzah looks at us in the face and says, you see all that stuff around you? Right? All the beautiful stuff, all the dishes and the clothing and the wine and all that, that's what's supposed to be right now. Yemos HaMashiach. But we're here to remind you, this is all kind of like fictitious. This is all kind of like an act, right? It's a it's a taste of what's supposed to be. But we all know that this is not what the world's all about. The problems are still going on. Anti-Semitism is still raging as we're making a seder, and there's still financial crises, and the world's not Yemot HaMashiach yet. So the matzah is telling us, are you still making a seder? Are you still making a seder? Through all these years, these thousands of years, you're still making a seder? So Chazal say that any generation in which the base of Mikdash is not built is like the generation in which the base of Mikdash was destroyed. Which is kind of hard, right? It's kind of hard to understand. How can you make a statement like that? Because it's like, it's like someone, for example, drives through the window of a department store because he didn't drive properly. He didn't, just went up the road, fell asleep at the wheel, drove through the, fortunately no one was injured, right? So it's not a totally sad story, but the window was destroyed. So you can't say anybody in whose day the window of the store is not reconstructed as someone who drove through that window. No, it's not. This guy he did an act. He drove through the window. He did something to warrant the destruction of this window, and I just didn't fix it. But you can't say it's like I drove through because I didn't fix it. I didn't fix it. It's a different thing. So it's only by the base of Mikdash. How can you say that because I didn't build it, it's like I destroyed it? Because it's not, the base of Mikdash was not simply destroyed because of the fact that we did all these averos. We're doing averos for a long time. Okay, so you could say they built up after a period of time, which is true. But the base of Mikdash was a source of inspiration. It was a source of Isorus for Klal Yisrael. One of the most important episodes in the Chumash, one of the most important about what it means to be a Jew, literally as opposed to the rest of the nations of the world. The Maharal says in Tiferet Yisrael, very specifically, he says, why is it that by the nations of the world they don't have a lot of positive mitzvahs? It's mostly just negative mitzvahs, right? So the negative mitzvahs we know correspond to the 365 days of the year, and the positive mitzvahs correspond to 248 limbs of the body. Is that just like coincidental correlation? Does it mean this is the days and this is the body? Why two separate things? Why not make it a calendar thing? This corresponds to the month. This corresponds to the year. What's the difference? So the Maharal explains beautifully, as he always does, that the 365 days of the year correspond to the solar year, obviously, which is the physical world in which we live. The point of negative mitzvahs is to keep you from destroying creation, not to change it, not to improve it necessarily, just not to destroy it. Don't do this, don't do that. It's like a child. You don't expect your child to go ahead and wash all the dishes, but do me a favor, don't break them either. Right? You don't expect the child to fold the laundry, but don't have a clothing fight in the middle of the house and come back to place the ball of gun. Just sit on your hands for 2 hours while I'm gone, and that'll be everything, as far as I'm concerned. No homework, nothing, right? The 365 negative mitzvahs is the way to maintain Ma'aseh Bereishis. And that's all Hashem expects from the nations of the world. Just don't destroy the place. Right? You want to live there, just don't destroy the place, okay? But positive mitzvahs are different. Positive mitzvahs are, they involve you. You have to get up and do something to improve the situation. That's what a positive mitzvah does. It improves the situation. It takes the physical world that exists as a status quo and says, let's make it a better place by being better people and constructing stuff and adding buildings and adding, whatever the case may be. So the gematria of the word is of 248 is Ramach and Avraham too. That's what defined Avraham, right? What was Avraham's greatest pleasure when he got the mitzvah bris milah? Why? Because now all 248 limbs of the body can be used in avodas Hashem. I'm inspired to go out and do and change the world. To be proactive. That's Avraham. He's proactive, and that's why Rav Dessler points out and says that we make the bracha Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, but we're not consistent. We only end up by saying Magen Avraham. We don't say Magin Avram wasn't a Magin for Yitzchak too, and for Yaakov for sure he wasn't. Yitzchak for sure he was. So why does it only mention Magin Avram? So the Rav Dessler says, because Avram was doing Kiruv. He was out in the world doing Kiruv. Yitzchak was entrenched. He was at home, minding the fort, basically learning Torah, became blind after a period of time. He was a Korban Tammy, right? He was a Korban Ola. He was a Korban Ola, basically, and he had to protect himself. He couldn't even leave the borders of Eretz Yisrael in the end. So he was a Shmira anyhow. Yaakov needed a Shmira, and he got it, but it wasn't the same dealing with Esav and Lavan as it was dealing with people in the streets. It's a Yesod and Kiruv. It's much more dangerous, to be able to be out, to Esav and Lavan, all these people are far less dangerous spiritually. Physically, they're more dangerous, but spiritually, they're more dangerous than secular Jews. How can you say anything like that?
They're more or they're less?
They're what?
They're less.
They're less.
They're less. Lavan and Esav are less.
Yeah.
Why? Right? Why? Just watch what happens when the person does kiruv. See, Lavan is my enemy. Yishmael is my enemy. Esav, when they walk in behind me, I'm looking over my shoulder. When they're walking to the side of me, I'm looking to the side over here. I know they want to get me. And I don't want to be friends with them necessarily. I'm not looking to build a relationship. I'm on guard the entire time. So spiritually, when they come after me, that's why they say anti-Semitism is the best thing for a Jew. Because the moment you put pressure on a Jew to be anything but a Jew, he goes and becomes a Jew all of a sudden. Give him the freedom, the leeway. What happens when you're doing kiruv, right? You do kiruv, and I can tell you firsthand, right? It happens all the time, and you just watch yourself go through the entire situation. You bring a person in, but you can't talk to him and say, let's be from today, right? Let's learn Torah and do Torah mitzvahs. Here's your tzitzis, here's your tefillin. Let's go do that, right? He says, I'll talk to you, but if we go for a beer, right? I know this place, it's kosher, right? It's kosher. We'll go have a couple of beers, schmooze a bit. So you say, fine, I'll go, no problem, right? And you do it. You wouldn't do it on your own necessarily. You wouldn't do it with your chavrusa, for sure not. Basically, you've got a base medrash. But to be able to talk to him, you have to go into his world to some degree. And you watch people go down and down and down and down in kiruv. Because unless you get a shmirah. So Rav Dessler says that Abraham is talking to all these people in the streets. It's mesukah, right? Because he certainly means well. He's certainly trying to do outreach, but he knows every time he talks to somebody, he has to compromise. To do kiruv is to compromise. It's part of the business. When I go traveling to Chutz La'aretz to go speak, the number one word that comes up in my everyday calendared life as I'm traveling from place to place to place is compromise. I'm always, the moment I get on the airplane, then when I get to the airport, then when I get out back to Telstone, I'm always compromising, davening, this and that thing, and sneeze, and it's like things I would never do at home. I don't have to do them at home because I live in a very secure, isolated environment that I create for myself. I can make it as holy as I want it to be. But you go into everybody else's world, it's a whole different story. You're a guest in someone else's house, right? And that's why, for a lot of respect, it's more dangerous in Chutz La'aretz for a Jew than it is amongst many reasons in Eretz Yisrael, because Eretz Yisrael, the battle lines are drawn. Right? There's the secular Jews and there's the from Jews. So it's like, well, we don't get it. It goes to extreme to a large degree. When a Chutz La'aretz, you're a guest in someone else's house. So you can't start fighting the streets with a Reformed Jew, a conservative Jew. You can't start, exactly, right? You can't be paused for station.
Cookie.
She obviously saw something, or heard something, that we didn't see.
He's an advocate for the for the secular Jew.
Yeah. We won't go into that. That's a Gemara. Anyhow, but the point is that so Rav Dessler says that Avraham Avinu is controversial. It's not about a love or hate thing. This is not about it's not a judgmental thing. It's not like some one person but another. Not do that. It's not about that b'chlal. It's about a metzius, about a reality. Kiruv is a reality where, by definition, it's very hard. I mean, you see, like there's some people who do kiruv who show up wearing a black suit and a black hat, and they have. That's why Rav Meir Schuster, unfortunately not well, but he's lived a long life. He was an anomaly. There are a few people who could walk up to you, Dakota, wearing a jacket over his shoulders and a black hat, and talk to anybody, and somehow get them into yeshiva and go for But I'm sure there are people who got intimidated, got scared away, and but it's not. It's the exception more than it is the rule. In the end, most of the time you show up at anything dressed like the part, people get scared and they run in the direction, unless they don't know differently. So you're forced to compromise by definition. So that is basically why it says Magen Avraham as opposed to the other two Avos, because only Avraham required a special shmirah, a special protection because of the avodah that he was in. And that's a havtacha Kosh Baruch Hu gives to somebody who does avodas Hashem. If you're going to do avodas Hashem, as the Gemara itself says, there's too many stories, but if you're doing the avodas Hashem, Hashem Shemayim, then even though the environment can be dangerous to you and pull you down, nevertheless the reality is that Kosh Baruch Hu will provide a certain shmirah and protect you. You should not be dragged down. But still, you may lose a few levels along the way. Mordechai, because he was out there doing Geula, as the Gemara in Megillah says, he dropped levels in the Sanhedrin. He was like number 4 at the beginning, went down to lower levels because he had to give up on his learning to some degree. That's not fair, right? Doesn't mean his schar l'mabah got less, right? He probably got more schar than people in higher levels of learning. The fact that somebody's a higher level in the base medrash doesn't mean he's getting more schar in the world to come. Schar in the world to come is determined by what you do for Kosh Baruch Hu when he wants it done. Right, so going back to that's why he is the gematria of Ramach, the 248, because of the fact that he was proactive. He used all of his, which is pretty amazing because I totally lost my thread of thinking, and it just came back 1 second before I said that sentence. Totally forgot where we're going here, right? But literally just popped in my mind. I thought, what am I doing? What's the point? Right there, say the Shemaya. But that's what he was. He was proactive. He was Mr. Proactive in the street doing kiruv, so Kosh Baruch Hu had to protect him again. A few parshas ago, in Parshas Balak, and then the parsha, right? What happens basically is you have the whole episode of Zimri and Cosby. And what happens? It says Yar Pinchas Yekam b'toch eid Yikach Ramach b'yado. Right? That's a pasuk. In one pasuk defines the Jew. The Yar Pinchas. The first thing to do, you have to see what's going wrong. You have to pay attention. You can't look the other way. That's not Jewish. That's not Torah. You cannot look the other way. We are people. We are partners. If you were partners in a legal firm, like a senior partner, a legal firm, right, and you saw a secretary stealing supplies or doing something that she should not be doing, or he should be doing, whatever the case may be, and you're a senior partner. If you're a junior partner, maybe you wouldn't say something. If you're just an employee, you might look the other way. But if you're a senior partner, you feel responsibility. They're stealing from me at the same time. So that's what Pinchas, that's what Heishi Chamasin means. Stealing from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, stealing from me. So we are, by definition, of people that look and sees what's wrong, and we don't look the other way. It's not the right thing to do. In New York, maybe they do things like that, but that's not us. We see wrong things. We have to respond in some level, some way. And this goes a long way. And otherwise, we get held responsible. In fact, the halacha is that Kanoim Pogim Bo is a mitzvah on all Klal Yisrael. Right, that's what Pinchas did, and the halach in the Shulchan Aruch is anybody who could have been the kanoi and didn't is chayiv korus. Not that you just did a bad thing, but you're cut off because we don't look the other way. If you could respond today, of course you can't really do it necessarily. Not even necessarily, you can't do it because it just doesn't work. But the desire to want to be a kanoi has to be there for sure.
Always what?
A zealot. A zealot. Like Pinchas was. Okay, that was the first thing he saw. The Yakam Tocha. He got up from the assembly, meaning you cannot be afraid to go out and do and say what has to be done. We're always stuck in this dual reality, the Jewish people. The same way, for example, it's always amazing how we have such a fierce halach of not speaking Lashon Hara, yet some of us are the greatest Lashon Hara speakers of all. But if you ask people why they're doing it, because of the fact that there's a Torah and there's this issue and that halacha and that chumrah and this kula, it's somehow the worlds collide and they force a compromise in one or the other. Right? Some people are the other way around. Some people refuse to speak a word of Lashon Hara, and as a result, they won't address any of the issues. You bring up an issue about a person that has to be fixed or changed a situation, but no, I don't want to talk about it. No, it's Lashon Hara, right? And the issue just dies with them, which causes another problem, right? So there's always this conflict. The Yiddishkeit creates tremendous, shalom bias is such a hugely important thing. Yet, halacha creates so many situations that are so counter shalom bias. You have to take into account these halachas, that's why there's so many, by definition, anything that has a lot of skulot, right? There's a skulot for this, skulot for that. Tons of skulot for shalom bayis. That's the first sign how difficult shalom bayis is to achieve. You don't need skulot for things that are easy to achieve, right? Only for things that are difficult to achieve. There's always this conflict and this tension within Torah, right? So, one of the things being is you don't stand out, can't be gaivadik, you'll be accused of being like this. But the bottom line is, a kanoi is somebody, and that's where the halacha is, that if you have to go ask a shaila, I saw X, Y, and Z, and I think it's an act of zealousness I should be doing right now. What's the halacha? What's the Pesach halacha? The Rav has to say no, right? If Pinchas had come to Moshe and say, "Paskin for me, can I go kill Zimri?" Moshe would have to say no. That's not a kanoi. A kanoi doesn't ask questions like that. The only thing that Pinchas asked was, "Do you want to do it, Moshe? Because you're the leader, right? I'm going to steal your authority over here." Moshe says, "No, the one who delivered the letter, he's the one to read the letter, right? Or read the delivered letter, and you go do the ma'isa. But if you have to ask a question, you're not a kanoi, right? Because by definition, you have to have the courage to stand up and take responsibility and do what has to be done, whatever the case may be. If it has to be done, and don't worry about public opinion. It's difficult, extremely difficult, because part of public opinion is your wife's opinion too, your kid's opinion too, right? And I can't tell how many times my kids have shut me down, right? You do that, we're changing your last name. Didn't exactly say it like that, but that was the implication, to some degree. Now they've come along, actually quite pleased, because I've heard them speak to other people about Israel and things like that are important to me, that I stopped speaking about because I thought they've heard enough of this already. But I see on their own that they've actually given over a lot of these things on their own too, as well. Just to all due respect. That's the second thing he does. What's the third thing he does? Yikach v'mach biyado. He took a spear in his hand. But of course, the word ramach, right, which could be spelled reish vav mem ches, is written reish mem ches, like the word ramach itself, because it corresponds to the positive mitzvahs. 248 positive mitzvahs. Right? What does it mean? It means that Pinchas was somebody who was his whole energy was for Kodesh Baruch Hu, for Avodas Hashem. Pinchas was a person in waiting for a cause. There are people just like you have Rod Shalom, that's R. You have Kishacha B'Leivachad, you have B'Leivachad Kishacha, right? But in Israel, it's Kishacha B'Leivachad, meaning that first there was unification. And then there was the cause. By the Mitzrayim, Rashi brings down, it was B'Leivachad Kishachad. First there was the cause, and then there was the unity. So as long as the cause existed, the unity existed too. That's a bad unity, because causes come and go. The same way, for example, if there's an issue at the local cheder, all the parents come to, "Oh, I didn't know you lived here. Wow, what's it with your kid?" The whole thing like that. All of a sudden the issue is over, you finish, it's complete, people go back to their houses, there's no longer a sense of unity. But if the Kishachad B'Leivachad means you're automatically unified, the cause is just a way to exhibit that unification, to put into practice in the end. Likewise, the same thing is true about Romach B'Yado. The Pinchas was somebody who lived specifically and was inspired specifically to serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's all of his energy. And if he wasn't doing it, then basically he was doing anything he could that somehow was attached to that idea. Just like the Nefesh Chaim brings down in the first shar, I believe, right, about the machlokus between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Yishmael, whether or not a person should be learning Torah all day long and not going to work. The Rashbi held, you learn full time. No, and a Kodesh Baruch Hu will take care of your needs. And Rabbi Yishmael said, no, average person can't live like that. You have to work somewhat and learn whenever you can, right? And a Kodesh Baruch Hu will take care of your needs, both learning it and in Gashmis as well. So Gemara says many people tried the Rabbi Yishmael and they weren't successful. There's very few people who can really live that kind of lifestyle sincerely, where they're not bitter, they're not complaining and boring from everybody else, and running around, wasting time. They adopt that lifestyle. Very few people, as the Nefesh Chaim points out, the one where you learn full time and don't go to work. The majority of people have to work and make a living. That's what he says. So the Nefesh Chaim points out, in mind, he says, but don't think for a second that Yishmael is saying you can stop learning. He's not saying that. He's not saying you stop learning completely. What does he mean? It means that there's no two worlds. If you have to get up and go to a job, it's because it's a mitzvah. It's because it's the way of supporting yourself so you can live a Torah lifestyle. Pay for Shabbos, pay for Cheder, pay for Yeshiva, pay for Sfarim, pay for Tefillin, pay for food, whatever they're paying for. But there's no two worlds by Klal Yisrael. Everything is L'Shem Shemaim. But even you're going to Kibbutz Levi for a weekend for R&R to rest, you can come back and recharge your batteries because you feel the need for a break. It's also the gather of Torah mitzvahs because it's for the sake of as long as everything's kosher and done the way it's supposed to be done, of course, right? But that's the way Pinchas lived his life. Pesach, Yetziat Mitzrayim, was about HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving us Romach B'Yadeinu. Meaning what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I've had enough of mankind that sits around, simply just waits for things to happen. Right? Up until now, it's only been a question of maintaining Maaseh Bereshis, which is why I didn't really get involved with anybody until Abraham came along. Abraham was proactive. Abraham got up and went out to change the world. The Gemara says before Abraham came along, nobody knew who Kodesh Baruch Hu was. Almost nobody knew B'chlal. When he left this world, almost everybody knew who Kodesh Baruch Hu was. How'd that happen? Because he sat at home? No. Abraham went from place to place to place. Whatever he could do. He was using his energy completely for the sake of trying to make the world a better place. He wasn't simply learning Torah and doing mitzvahs the entire time. That's why he was Magen Avraham. He could whenever he could. And whatever he did was a mitzvah. So therefore, and by the way, it's a very important qual too. You watch people, during davening, they daven very quickly. This is not an indictment of anybody. Everybody's got their own personal cheshbonos, but as a klal, as a rule. The Gemara says that the Hasidic Rishonim, very famous Mishnah, right? The Hasidic Rishonim, not the Hasidim of today, but the pious people of the time of the Tanoim, okay? They used to prepare for davening for 1 hour, used to daven for 1 hour, and it doesn't make a chiluk between Shacharis and Mincha Mari, but I assume there must be some difference. And then they had 1 hour to come down for the davening after that, so to speak. So that's like basically at least 9 hours of tefillah a day, more or less, right? That's more than I could ever imagine learning in a single day, let alone learning and davening. And yet they were Tanoim. They were Tanoim. These are people who wrote the Mishnah. So the Gemara asked the question that we're all asking ourselves: when did they have time to learn?
And they had jobs.
And they had jobs too, a lot of them. Yeah. When did they have time to learn? So Gemara comes back and says that their Torah was nishmar, and their parnasa too, for that matter. They were to accomplish parnasa-wise in less time, but others had to do in more time. They had more tzlacha, right? Why? Because their tefillah was as strong as it was. Their connection to Kodesh Baruch Hu, they were tapping to a higher level of reality. It was Lamalam Tefah. As a result of that, their learning of everything else was nishmar. They could accomplish a lot more in a lot less time in the end. And you watch people who literally they cannot daven Shema Esrei for very long. They got to go right back to Gemara. They sneak out during Chazor Shas because they don't be sure learning during Chazor Shas, but they can't not learn during Chazor Shas. To do what? Whose Torah are you learning to yet? Because Baruch is telling you, stay in the base measures, daven with the tzibur, follow the halachas of tefillah, the way they're written down, have some kavanah, talk to me, connect to me, and I'll give you hatzlach that you're learning elsewhere. And you feel the need to go ahead and instead of all that, it's like it's a stira. I mean, they obey in hashkaf. It's confusion is really what it is, and taiva mixed together, and yitzhar as well mixed together. It's a lack of understanding of the klalim of Maaseh Bereshis. But here we are, thousands of years later, we tried it that way, right? We did the best we could. In Europe, we did the best we could. And going back into Spain, we did the best we could. We tried. We were learning. We had Rishonim. We had Achronim. We have Sforim. We had Batei Midrashos. We had Gedolei Ador. We had people. And still the Haskalah took place. Still there were Maskilim. You know who the Maskilim were? They were either Talmid Chachamim Gedolim themselves or sons of them who learned all day in the base medrash amongst the Gedolim of that generation. And then at nighttime, they went to Epicurus and came back the next morning and learned. Listen to Be'er 1, he speaks about these things. He also, it's baffling. How can it be? It doesn't make sense. And how did they let them in? But if you looked at them, you wouldn't know the difference of that today. You can see the difference. But back at that time, it was hard to tell the difference. And with the philosophy, the theory was in the end, we tried. We've been learning Torah. We've been trying to build yeshivas. There was a kiruv movement that was going full force in the 90s. It was amazing. You recall, the New York Times had an article about CEOs, Jewish CEOs, who had rabbis, young rabbis, old rabbis, come to their offices in downtown New York in the middle of their busy day to teach them Torah. It was chic.
In Pittsburgh too. Yeah.
It was chic. It was cool at that time to do that. There was kiruv was flowing, the money was flowing, the programs that were going on were unbelievable. And we pulled the plug ourselves. We didn't pull the plug. We were planning and we hired staff. And, the whole thing was expanding, and boom, the economy fell it instead. What do you want from us? We're doing kiruv. We're trying to stem the tide. One of the most brilliant statements, I've ever heard in my entire life. It's so short. I mean, I've heard a lot of brilliant statements, but sometimes the brilliance, takes a lot of work to get out. So it's a brilliant statement, but it's a long statement. But one of the most brilliant statements, one of the most inspiring statements that really personally drives me to a large degree, and a lot of other people I know as well, came from my Rosh HaShavua many years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and it's just as fresh in my mind as it ever was. I don't know who asked him the question, but we asked him. I don't know if it came up or he just told it to us basically. But at Torah, you were trained to do kiruv. That's what you were doing there. You weren't there to become a Talmid Chacham. You became one, it was more like, good for you. But it's like, there's a fire burning, and we need to save people and stem the tide of assimilation and into marriage. And the phrase of Noach Kohen, right? As opposed to ones who do it. Right? The phrase he coined that basically that summed the whole thing up was just one 3-word phrase: program or pogrom. That's the choice of a Jew. Program or pogrom. There's no middle ground. Either you're doing a program to save the Jewish people, to solve the problems of the day, right? To deal with the issues, or the pogrom's going to come at some point in time. There's no middle ground. Either we change the situation, or Kosh Baruch Hu will change the situation. It won't take a day, maybe a week or a month. It could take years before Kosh Baruch Hu finally responds, but that's the idea. That's what got him out of the base medrash. He would have been one of the Gedolei Dorim learning for sure today. Rabbi Freund, who is one of the Gedolei today, he was his chavrusa, and they used to learn non-stop, and they didn't sleep all week long. They used to come home Friday and go back to Motzi Shabbos and stay in the base medrash the entire week long. And they didn't go to sleep. Sleep came to them. These are the stories they tell. Chaim will tell you, right? And he'll tell you how they used to have kids wake them up they drift off for 15 minutes and be woken up and go back and learning non-stop. And Chaim is like full Yerushalmi, Chassidish, Yerushalmi, the whole thing. Got all the stories. His brother was the one that was lifted a few years ago, but he himself, is known in that Sriva. He gave shir in Torah, and we once asked him why he came from his world to our world to give shir, because he said he held it with Noah. He held as one of the most successful men in the generation, both kiruv and learning-wise, and he was the Mesiras Nefesh, and giving up his learning to save Klal Yisrael, a time that nobody was doing it. It was very, very rare. It was very controversial, but he felt after the Holocaust, that was a big wake-up call, that either it's program or pogrom. Either you proactively do something to change the situation. You cannot stand back and look at 80% assimilation and 52 or 54% intermarriage and say it's not my problem, because it is everybody gets sucked in. Even the people who who are supporting J Street and doing things. So many Jews during World War II who thought the knock would come on their neighbor's door, not on their door, were shocked and surprised to find out that every Jew was a Jew. Because you know why? It's not the secular people. It's not the Gentiles who determine who gets it, who doesn't get the get. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu who does. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I don't care what your philosophy was. You're part of the same people. He said, a program or pogrom. That's what Tisha B'Av. The volume is coming out. That's the whole Musar. I can show you pasuk after pasuk. That's what Torah is all about. It's all about this idea of being proactive. The situation in the world today is becoming more difficult by the day, right? It's becoming more intense by the day. At what point in time do we finally say, how far is this going to go? How bad is it going to get? Or do we simply say, well, it's bad, but it's tolerable, right? It could always be worse. So Kosh Baruch Hu says, what? I make it as bad as it is right now. So I'll take a paro, I'll put a paro in office who has the disease, who takes Jewish children and uses their blood to bathe. Will that get your attention? So 2 weeks ago, one of the most tragic things, it's so, I'm afraid to talk about it because it's so controversial, because, I know that people will come after me for saying things like this. But this episode in Brooklyn took place with this 8-year-old child. was so off the grid that nobody knows what to do with it. It's just so, if a Gentile, my friend told me that how did someone deal with it? He lives in New York, how did a neighbor deal with it there? He said, remember the Son of Sam killings?
Yeah.
Right? And they thought he was Jewish at first, and they found that later on he wasn't Jewish. Well, Baruch Hashem wasn't Jewish in the end. So this person says that this guy can't be Jewish either. The Son of Sam thing teaches you that Jews can't do things like that. Oh, yes, they can. There was a very famous story back at the time. This is such a telling. We just so disconnected from Tanakh. Very important story that everybody has to know. These are not just stories in Tanakh. They are lessons for everyday life. The famous story of the Pelegish of Givah.
Right.
Very important story. Why is it an important story? It was a civil war that took place. 100,000 people from the 11 tribes and Binyamin were almost wiped away completely because of this episode. Because of what? One strange, bizarre thing. Very strange, bizarre episode. A Levi's going from house to house to house in the territory of Binyamin, and he stops at one person's house who gives him all kinds of hospitality, and they hear he's there, and some guys show up and want to do sodomy with him, basically, and he, of course, refuses to do anything, so he sends his Pelegish instead. Okay, what was he doing? What was his thinking? Whatever, that's what he did. He sends his Pelegish instead, and they violate her, they kill him in the process. He's so incensed. This can happen in Klal Yisrael. This can happen amongst the Jewish people, right? That he says this is intolerable. He takes her and divides her body into 12 parts. Disgusting, terrible. I mean, how do you do a thing like that? How can you even send a message, but to actually send a body part? How do you? It's so off the grid by Klal Yisrael. It's from God. Takes it, right? Sends and says, "This is what's going on in your land right now." And everyone goes, whoa, this is terrible, this is disgusting, we can't let this happen, we got to respond to it. And what do? They go to war against Binyamin. There's a terrible civil war. We almost lose an entire Sheva because of it. We lose 100,000 people from the other tribes. It's terrible. It's a major crisis. Not a war against an enemy nation. It's a civil war. Jew killing Jew. And the Medrash says, whoa, this is a major, Pagam in Jewish history. It's a major black hole. Why? As the Gemara in Baruch says, nothing happens by accident. There's got to be a reason. Because of a Pelegish. One stump Pelegish over here. So they just, no, what happened over here? It's different. Micha, who left Mitzrayim with Klal Yisrael, took a pestle. Took it to Avodah Zarah with him. Took it across the Yam Suf. Took it all the way to Israel. Set up a little of Beit Avodah Zarah in Dan, right? And it was still there. And you can imagine people going, I hear there's still that pestle in Dan. Terrible. Can you think about that at some point in time? We should have a voter, for a congressman, representative, speak to the president, something to get, what's for supper, right? How was your day today? And life just went on. This pestle's still there year after year after year. So Kosh Baruch Hu says, if you're not going to get up and fight on behalf of my covenant, you'll get up and fight on behalf of your own in the end. So the whole Pelegish of Givah was only a way of creating the proper response necessary for what took place with the pestle and Dan. What do you learn from this story? That when things happen that are off the grid, that are really shocking, that make us stand back and go, whoa, this is like, we can't, how do we deal with this? This is so, it's catastrophic and it's like not even, don't know what to do with it in the end. You have to ask the question, which response would that have been appropriate for in terms of Kavod Shemai? Like, where did we not have that kind of response? This child who died is probably a tzaddik, finished his tikkun, went to Shemai, all those things can be true. Dismemberment, hard to understand how, what Kosh Baruch has cheshbonos, right? The family, same thing. We can't talk about these. We don't know what the cheshbon about these people, what Kosh Baruch Hu thinks. We only know what happened to them. They should have the chum and all that. Look at the global picture, right? And how it affects communities at large. You have to ask the question, what's missing from this picture over here? Somehow we have to assume, the Gemara says this specifically, that if we were forced for this incident to have this kind of response over here, it's because we didn't have that kind of response we should have over there. What's the over there? Okay, that's maybe perhaps without the video, it'll be at the same time. But that's what it means. It means that we missed the boat on something. We are half asleep about something. We're not responding to things that we were supposed to respond. It's like the patient lying there, and it's like, take the paddles, boom. Ever watch that body? Boom, up in the air. A real shocker. Probably killed the person who was living, but here, because he dies, brings him back to life again. Real shocker. Because the heart's going to keep beating. The heart's not beating. As Yechezkel says, the main siman of the Gula Shlema, I will turn your heart of stone back into a heart of flesh. 2 weeks ago, we felt what it means to have a heart of flesh. It just literally shook us to our core. We felt the heart of flesh because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants something from us. For thousands of years, he wants something. History is waiting. Going back to Mitzrayim, we got kicked out early because the Gula should have come and didn't come because there was something missing. We came back from Bavel, and the Zohar says, the well springs opened up. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to bring the Gula Shlema right then and there. But, says the Zohar, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, right? He's writing, but when the Jewish people did not come back from Bavel en masse, they chose to stay behind in Chutz La'aretz. They closed up again until Mashiach is going to come. So the Gra tried again in his time. Piece by piece, piecemeal, just passive. Passivity. We are so passive. Pinchas saves the day because he's proactive. Avram saves the world because he's proactive. Because Baruch Hu is looking for people to take responsibility. The Yar Pinchas, and he saw the Yakam, he got up from, amongst the Eidah. He wasn't afraid of a public opinion and was going around them. He was inspired. He was energized. He applied himself in Avodas Hashem. And as the Gra points out, he's a remarkable thing, that everything works midah k'neged midah. Normally, midah k'neged midah means that if you do the wrong thing, HaKadosh Baruch Hu punish you in that thing, you do the wrong thing, and because you need to learn a lesson. So the punishment is the crime. But the other less well-known form of midah k'neged midah is that if you put 50% effort into a mitzvah, b'derech teva, Shemayim will match that, b'derech nes. You'll get siyata d'shmaya matching your effort. You want more siyata d'shmaya? Put more effort in. You want less siyata d'shmaya? Put less effort in. But Shemayim will match you 1 for 1. That's, you put in 60% of your energy, they give you a matching donation as well, right? He says, except in one area. In the area of Ikvus and Mashiach. Is in the area of Kibbutz Galius and the actual trying to hasten the redemption is there. He says, first of all, it's very misukan, very dangerous, and very risky. So how could you be samach on a nes l'chachila? He says, because by this mitzvah, Shemayim antes up way more than your effort. Even up to 1,000 times more than what you put in. It's like hydraulic lifts, where you get enough, pulleys and all that. You can lift a very heavy weight, but just pulling with one hand. That's the way the whole thing's set up. So Shemayim makes it, you make one small little effort, they match it 1,000 times full, even more so you can possibly imagine. So that's really what Tisha B'Av, that's what the 3 weeks are all about. The fact that we're still sitting here, and that's what Chazal said, if you have not rebuilt the base of Mikdash, then it would have been destroyed in your day. You know why? Because it wasn't simply about avoiding Averis and maintaining my Brachis. It was inspiration to get up and do something. If they lost the base of Mikdash, it's because they lacked inspiration. No inspiration, no need for the base of Mikdash. What's the point? So if you're still living an uninspired life, you also don't need a base of Mikdash. And had it been there, it would have been destroyed. Not talking about the same, the Averas they did, you're also doing. And the base of Mikdash, more than that, was inspiration to be a shutaf for the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you're not being that, no base of Mikdash for you either. Kiyuv will destroy your generation as well. That's got to change. That's got to change.